Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. We are starting just a minute or so early, so please use the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. We'd love to know who's joining us today and where you're joining from. For those of you that haven't been on our webinars before, I'm Karen Byington. I'm the Director of Content Development at Shift. I'm also happen to be a certified workplace violence trainer, and I worked closely with our panelist, Chris Grollnek, to create our new active threat preparedness training. So we are excited to have this great panel and to have all of you with us today. I just want to go through a couple of quick logistics before we dive into the content. Many of you are attending to earn SHRM or HRCI credit. So my colleague Kristen is going to post that in the chat about midway through the presentation. So just pay attention and make sure you jot that down for your records. And please use that for any questions or comments, and we're going to do our best to address them as we're going through the discussion. And anything we don't get a chance to answer, we'll follow up with you after. And for those of you who want to keep track of these types of webinars and find out what else Shift is up to, please follow us on LinkedIn, and Kristen's going to drop a link in the chat to that as well. And finally, we post a survey at the end of the webinar, and we just would love if you took a minute or a few seconds to just answer a couple of questions, because your feedback really does help us improve our content and what we deliver and be able to give you some great content in the future. So thank you for taking a minute to do that. So as we are diving in and thinking about workplace violence prevention and active threat preparedness, what the conversation usually starts off with is talking about policies and compliance requirements and security measures, emergency procedures, and all of those things are really important. But when a situation unfolds in real life, employees aren't flipping through a policy manual. They're making decisions in real time, and they're often under stress and with limited information. And so today we're going to explore what preparedness really looks like and how the duty of care expectations are evolving, and really what organizations can do to build confidence and readiness without creating fear. And so we have the best guests we could possibly have for this discussion. And I'm joined by Katherin Nukk-Freeman. She's an employment attorney and the co-founder of Shift HR, and Chris Grollnek, who's an internationally recognized active threat prevention expert. And so I would love Katherin and Chris, if you would take a second to introduce yourselves. Katherin, we'll start with you.
Sure. You can start with me, but I'm just spinach on the side. Chris is our main event today, and we're so thankful that he could join the call. So thank you, Karen. For those of you who haven't been on webinars with us before, I'm Katherin Nukk-Freeman. I'm one of the co-founders of Shift, and I'm the president and chief culture officer. We're Shift HR compliance training. And before starting Shift, I also co-founded what's now the largest woman-owned management side employment law firm on the East Coast, with offices in New York City and New Jersey and in San Diego. And I'm lucky enough to be bi-coastal right now between the San Diego office and the East Coast office. And we do everything we can to help employers comply with the law. And at Shift, we do everything we can to make compliance training and other HR related training as impactful and game changing as possible. We're also the only HR compliance training company, which is both co-founded and run by employment lawyers. So I and the rest of my entire Shift team, we live and breathe HR compliance every day of the week, every day of the year, and we love it. So glad to have you all here for this really important discussion, and really glad to have Chris on the call.
Thank you. My name is Chris Grollnek. I am the chairman of the board for the Active Shooter Prevention Project. We're a consortium of 30 companies that have united under one umbrella. Some we have ownership with, so full disclosure there. And we have a total solution. And what I like to start these, I do a lot of webinars and a lot of radio and TV. And I try to remind everybody, you know, as exciting as HR is, workplace violence and active shooter and active threat is about as exciting, probably 10 points less. So we're going to try to make this a little bit motivated for you, upbeat. I hope you'll leave feeling better than when you got here, because, you know, we have solutions to these problems. They're not something we need to look at and say, well, I'm afraid or concern to have a good conversation with somebody. And really, that's how it starts. Prevention starts at, the kitchen table. So I hope that we can enlighten you a little bit with that, answer some of your questions, and looking forward to a really good interview.
And I really appreciate that positive approach, Chris, because you're right. The subject can instill fear in everybody, our employees, our leaders. And so to approach it with a positive attitude, like how can we make things better? How can we prevent and be proactive with respect to these issues? It's the way to be. So I really appreciate that.
Of course.
And Chris, it's been a pleasure working with you to figure out how do you take this and really create something where we can put something in the world that will help keep employees safe and do the right things and do it in a way that we're not scaring them, but giving them confidence, which is what it's all about. And so we welcome the both of you and look forward to a great discussion. And thank you all of those of you who put in the chat that we see. We have people here today from New York, New Jersey, California, Iowa. So welcome to all of you. And we think that you're going to get a lot of value out of this discussion. So Katherin, I'm going to start with you. Because we mentioned in the beginning that organizations often think about workplace violence prevention and immediately they talk about compliance requirements. And so maybe you can start the conversation talking a little bit about how employer expectations are changing.
Yeah, so everything seems to be changing in this area, and it's probably in part because the incidence of workplace violence has just continued to increase over time. And so organizations are being more proactive in their handling of it, and there are more regulatory requirements addressing these increasing issues, and they're evolving regularly. We were just talking before we joined this call. Not only has California brought significant attention to the workplace violence prevention programs, but Chris may go into detail in a little bit about how states who seem to be contrary in many other positions have come together, like California and Texas and Colorado, and have put together sweeping requirements with respect to workplace violence that impact the health system industry, healthcare industry. New York has also enacted requirements for the retail industry, and also one of the most comprehensive state level healthcare workplace violence prevention laws, which will go into place in January 2027. So these regulations, these requirements are continuing to expand definitely on an annual basis as of late. So what we're also finding is what employers are recognizing is that these workplace violence issues are much more than just a risk impacting safety. That used to be the focus previously. Workplace violence, safety, they seem to go hand in hand, correct? But they also end up impacting operations, reputation of an employer, the culture within an employer. So it's just becoming much more impactful across the boards than just as it relates to a workplace safety issue. And so what employers are doing now is they're trying to move beyond just having these workplace prevention policies in place, but really creating and demonstrating that they're taking meaningful efforts to make sure that their entire workforce understands what these policies are and are ready to act in a way that's consistent with these policies. So, it's in part because they're being proactive to address these concerns. It's also in part because there's also a growing, I guess I should say, emphasis and concern on whether or not an employer is taking the appropriate duty of care to protect its employees. And so as a lawyer, I know that, those employers who don't exercise the appropriate duty of care run the risk of significant liability. And when you're talking about liability here with workplace violence issues, it's much more significant than liability in a harassment or discrimination case, which is still significant. So if we're talking about harassment versus death or injury, that duty of care is definitely something that employers need to make sure that they are exercising to take whatever steps they can to prevent that violence, which might otherwise exist. And while there's no federal mandate, there's no federal law that governs it, the different federal entities like OSHA, for example, Occupational Safety and Health Association, they have what's called a general duty clause that creates an expectation on employers that they engage in the necessary steps to prevent workplace violence. And OSHA can actually cite employers who do not do so. And that's, as recent as a, case this past year. So I'm curious, and I was asking Karen before we started the call, how many healthcare organizations are on this call? Because in my opinion, every single healthcare organization should be up on these issues. And I am not clear what the statistics are outside of the healthcare industry, but in the healthcare industry, they are, for those of you who don't realize this, 10% of the US workforce represents healthcare workers, but 50% of non-fatal workplace violence issues impact healthcare workers. 81% of nurses have reported being a victim of workplace violence. 91% of ER doctors have reported being a victim of workplace violence. So it's important to every single one of us on this call for sure. And anybody in the healthcare industry, it's absolutely essential that they're on this call and really taking this advice, as seriously as they can.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing that having a policy is important. And I think, there was a baseline of making sure that that was the minimum standard. And now more and more, government entities are starting to recognize that that is, that's a threshold that you need to exceed, that you need to know that employees not only know the policy, but that they're ready to be able to act on it and that they know what to do when there is a stress, when there's uncertainty, when there's pressure. So when the moment happens, they're more prepared.
Yeah. And just to add to that point, so as you can imagine, then courts, regulators, juries, they are really honing in on and examining what risks was the employer aware of beforehand? What risks should the employer have been aware of beforehand? And did they take appropriate steps to prevent those risks, whether it's by having a policy, training on that policy, educating employees on that policy, and then enforcing the policy? And what risks did they not handle appropriately? And we actually, so I have two firms. So when I say we as the employment lawyers, separate from Shift HR compliance training, we get questions from our HR leaders periodically where they'll call us and say, employees have reported somebody acting erratically and seeming out of sorts and threatening under their breath workplace violence. And that employer then has to deal with the risk of, okay, if there's not direct threat and I act and I remove the employee from the workplace, I could have that employee come back after me and they could claim that I was discriminating against them. But what I pose to the employer is you have to weigh that risk with the risk of, this person is acting erratically. If you don't remove them and they come in with a gun or they come in and engage in other acts of workplace violence and others are injured, then you have that risk on the other side of equation that you're facing. So you really have to evaluate carefully the circumstances, the fact, the risks, and decide which risk you're more comfortable taking. So it really comes down to knowing about the risk and then assessing how to handle that risk.
Yeah. Chris, maybe you can expand on that a little bit because you've spent years studying real incidents and training organizations to be prepared. So what do organizations tend to misunderstand about preparedness in general?
Well, I hope everybody buckles up. We're going to get on an escalator here, probably go up and down a little bit. So to go up from the legal HR side and risk management side, it's called foreseeability. And what Katherine's alluded to is I've worked some cases recently where it was foreseeable that this employee or this person would do X and it's reasonable that they did Y, and it was unreasonable that you didn't take action at Z, and therefore you're liable. Some have gone all the way north to the Supreme Court. Others are making their way there now. I try not to make these about that and just all, full disclosure. So as I said about we're going to make you feel better than than when you got here at the end of this. These are really kitchen table economic conversations, right? And when I speak to people, it's for the we, not the me, but it's got to come from some type of lens or perspective. I am the nation's leading active shooter prevention expert. I was in an active shooter in 2010 in real time before it happened, and then right up to the time it started, all the way till the time it ended. I'm a retired police officer, and while I thought I knew a lot about it, I knew nothing about it when it happened to me. And then turns out I'm the fourth person in the world to write a postgraduate degree on the phenomena of active shooters. So that was 2012. Since then, I've advised several, three presidents, testified before Congress and the Senate. I advise a lot of chiefs of staff, but what I found the common thread is when we finish the professional side of the talk, they always want to know about their families. So when I said the escalator, right, like that's the top level. Let's go down to our level where we're at right now. What is the best prevention method? Open communication, no fear. Look at this through the lens of, look, we can prevent these. And it's not just me saying that. To Katherin and Karen's point, I just did something for the Department of Justice for the second time. And if you think about it from the administration points of view, under two separate administrations, the Biden administration and the Trump administration, we created, so it's apolitical, a national standard for prevention, for workplace violence prevention, but it's the ultimate workplace violence. It's the active shooter. And when people think of active shooters, they think of schools, when the reality is only about 38 to 41% of these happen in schools, and that's 38 to 41% too many. However, they're happening in our workplaces. Those are the environments that are the most vulnerable, the most susceptible. So we look at this thing from a common sense perspective. I try to reduce it down to get out of the postgraduate and get into the 8th grade level of go talk to your children, go talk to your family, go talk to your family members, because if you're not, someone else is. And, I don't sell hope. I don't sell fear. I don't sell anything. We do a lot of consulting and advising, but I would tell you this, the types of videos that are out there that mitigate these and give you some perspective of how to best deal with them, that's your first, second, third step. There's other steps out there. And I would encourage you, look up, I haven't done it in weeks, but I'm this confident. Go to AI or go to Google. Either one. One's going to tell you what to do and one's going to tell you some ads. I am on top of the ads. There are no ads. So if you type in active shooter expert, my name is synonymous with that. If you ask any AI, who's the active shooter expert, they're going to tell you there isn't really one, but Chris Grollnek's known as the one. And I only say that from a place of humility. I'd like to retire, so I'm trying to end these things. Like, this scourge is disgusting. However, we have to talk about it. And that's the moral of this theme today for me. Get the conversation started and find common sense solutions that don't scare you, don't scare your employees, and accelerate to the level of what Katherin and Karen are talking about. Is it legally compliant? Will it match what you need? And since the law is so loose, this is a great starting point. I hope that helps, Karen. I think that was right down the way.
Yeah, it does. And I think that brings us to the next thing I just wanted to dive in. You've talked about taking the elevator ride up and down, but to get a little more into the details, you've seen situations where people were prepared when situations unfolded and where they weren't. And so, can you talk a little bit about the difference in how those events unfold and what has your experience taught you about seeing when people and employees are in the situation, you could tell that they've been prepared and they're acting well, and when it doesn't? Like, how do you see that unfold differently?
That's a really great question. So I have been part of the investigations of these mass homicides in several states since 2012. And I've seen my fair share of all the things that go wrong. And when one thing goes wrong, it turns out 25 things are about to follow and you just don't know. Murphy's Law, you can count on it, right? If it can go wrong, it will. And the people that have the level of preparedness traditionally get passed over. I'll give you an example. I can't name the exact incident, but it'll be intuitive enough that someone will figure it out, and you can feel free to share it. There was a movie theater massacre, over the last 20 years. I won't say which one or what year, because there were a few. The shooter went to a location nearest his home, and he walked up to the. Now, remember, I am apolitical and gun rights. It doesn't matter. As a Marine, I fought for your constitutional right, go buy guns. As a policeman, no one needs a gun. So I'm not the right person to ask. But this is about that. It's about signage. It's about training. It's about understanding what works and what doesn't. So this evildoer goes up to this movie theater, and in a there's no signs that say no guns allowed, and it says this is an armed premises and you're under surveillance. And he got in his car and went home and changed his date, changed his plan, changed his approach. And he actually passed 7 movie theaters before he picked the one that he went and created this atrocity at, because it had a big sign, no guns allowed. It's an open environment. Now, this isn't a promotion sign for have signs that say no guns allowed or don't have no guns allowed. What it is it shows you the mindset of they wanted to create a nice environment for everybody, which is fair. But we have technology now. This isn't a sales plug, but there is technology now, a wide spectrum of it, that you don't need a sign. You can do it in the background, and you can make these environments even more open and transparent than they are right now and not make them fortresses. So what do I see is when people freak out on the wrong side of prevention, they create a fortress. When they reduce their fear and increase their readiness, it's a more open and transparent environment. And there are a lot of case studies out there, psychological case studies. Better places to work are more open, transparent, and feeling. And if you'd indulge me for 30 seconds, I'm going to give you one that you can just walk away with. If you think about the largest targeted area in the world, like the number one hit that you would get, it would be the White House. The front door is unlocked. You can take a tour, and they've never shot anybody in the atrium or in the White House for that matter, right? Like maybe outside, but not inside. And there's a lot of people say, well, Chris, that's hyperbolic. There's a lot of security and a lot of layers. That's true. But really what that boils down to is they're just prepared. They don't live by the mindset that most of us do. Oh, that'll never happen here. Now flip to a school. Terrible environment to use, but it's factual. Double sets of doors, human traps where you have to walk through one, get locked in before you get to the other. You have to be on a list to visit. You can't stay more than 30 minutes. You have to be escorted. You have to do a background check before you go. And yet it seems we have a school shooting every other day. So is it the facility locking down that's working, or the facility that has the mindset of the transparent training and some type of understanding of what's good and right with, the world, and let everyone feel better? And I have found that the emotional piece of this is just as much solid as the human resource side, as the people capital side, as the human capital, or even the legal side. And when you get everybody bought into it, everybody starts acting in a different way, and they're just more prepared, but they're not paranoid. They're just prepared.
Yeah. And I think that gets to when we were developing our course, a concept that we kept in mind about preparedness is that information is important, but information alone isn't enough, and that you need to give employees and learners an opportunity to practice decision making. Because in a moment of high stress, you need to know that you are prepared to respond. And the best way to do that is to allow people to have scenarios and identify concerns and apply frameworks in a practice scenario so that when it happens in real life, they've had time to practice and to think through their decision-making process. So, Chris, can you touch on, and Katherin, I'd love you both to weigh in actually, why teaching skills is really different than just teaching and providing information?
If I could just start here, I'll digress in just one moment. But if you just blanketly say, hey, I'll be okay, and if something goes wrong, I'm going to be okay, we need to remember that in 1500 BC, we realized you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of training you have. And any basic training is better than no training. And when you have an opportunity to have a course that's available now online, because we do a lot of things through learning management systems now. And when there's something that is there and prepared for you, that it can actually plant the seed of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what you could take away from that, and then go pass that to your family, it's priceless. And just, this is not a plug. We don't sell anything. I have a free book of how to talk to children about active shooters, and you don't have to sign up for it. You don't have to register. It's a booklet. It's a PDF. It's free. We don't capture your information. I'll drop a link in there. You can grab that. And I'm not going to say it's the most well done product, but what it is it's a start. And what you take is you take that first step and you realize this is palatable to everybody, and we can talk to everybody. Then you start adding the courses for work, and you talk to the people that are going to be taking them, not just as an HR representative or a lawyer or a good boss, but rather as a side-by-side human being, and said, look, I'm trying to offer you the benefit of this is your baseline, and it's up to you to build on or subtract from as you see fit. But for this office, this industry, we're going to start here. And we have found that to be very successful.
So true. You're falling back on what you've practiced, what you're familiar with.
And you're exactly right, Karen. Like that's our goal at Shift always, not just with respect to workplace violence training, but we want to make sure the learner practices what to do, because you could be quizzed on, is this the right thing to do versus is that the right thing to do? But when push comes to shove, when you're actually practicing it, that's when it becomes more ingrained in your ultimate behavior. And we're advocates of it, not having the one and done philosophy, because you could tell your employees once, distribute your policy on preventing workplace violence once, and that won't necessarily sink in. But if you train them on it periodically so that they start to become comfortable with what their responsibilities are, what their action steps should be, that's when you really help them be prepared and ready to handle these situations when they happen. And no one's going to be, or very few people are going to be 100% prepared, because your nerves obviously get in the way. But to the extent you can have people to start to think a little bit more second nature, this is what I do in a time of crisis, this is how I've been trained and practiced responding, you'll hopefully have a better result than you otherwise would.
And if I may just add on to that one thing, a lot of people believe that, good guys with guns will stop bad guy with guns. But the reality is, if we can keep the bad guy from ever getting there, you don't need any. So if you have that baseline that you can talk about this without being, I'm old, so the Rambo effect, I don't know who that would be, maybe the John Wick effect. You don't need that. What you need is literally just a baseline understanding and have that baseline training. And now you don't, I've heard this before, so I'll say it here. The return on investment is going to be difficult to capture because it's hard to measure prevention. But the return on regret is 100%. And you can measure that every day. And when you hit that human emotion side, even with your employees, it opens their minds to take more types of training. And you'll find that the posture changes and the environment actually relaxes.
Yeah. Chris, that brings us to, can you talk a little bit about what actually happens to people under stress? So the importance of being prepared is because we respond differently under stress and when we're not under stress. So how and why do employees tend to struggle to make decisions in an emergency? Like, what do you see happen, and what's that effect of stress?
Well, that's probably a three-part question. And the first part is, what are they thinking before a stressful environment happens? Probably about pizza, lunch, coffee, or a break, right? And if something were to interrupt that, it's called an OODA loop, where you decide, orient. It's just like a cycle of operations that your brain goes through, right? Orient or observe, orient, decide, and act. And you can go anywhere within that. It's like a continuum. And if you're just walking to the restroom, the water cooler, the coffee maker, and something goes wrong, something doesn't seem right, somebody raises their voice, you usually stop and look. And then if something in the office is really not right, somebody's fist fighting, getting fired, there's security everywhere, you just want to mind your own business and walk away with it. You don't want any part of that. Now there is the percentage of the population that wants to be right up in there and find out more about it. But if that were a poor incident that was unfolding, their body would be in fight or flight mode. And really we forget about the hidden F, which is freeze. You just don't know what to do. So talking about this at a very low level, so please forgive me. This isn't patronizing, just it is what it is. But John and Joe and Mary are in an argument at work, and one reaches up and slaps the other, and you hear the slap, and you stop and you look over, and you don't know what just happened. Out of the 100 people that are supposed to report everything they saw, heard, and witnessed, you might get two people that would call, and then another two that would call would be the ones that you would expect to call over anything. And then the other two people that would call are the ones you wish wouldn't call anybody, but they're going to. And I say that from a position of, I've seen this too many times. A shooting happens, the news shows up, and that one employee that you wouldn't want anywhere near a microphone is the first person the news finds. And I'm a former contributor for CNN and for Fox and BBC, all over the map. And when we talk about that, you have to address those employees. This place never got prepared, and we knew it was going to happen here. And Then you get the other people. I can't believe it happened here, and I just want to be with my family. And the mission became stop them from happening. And we have a pretty good track record. We have 3 registered saves that didn't happen because of those programs. And this is that baseline. So it works. I hope that answers specifically, Karen. I might have been off the rails a little bit, but the human
Yeah,
side of it.
I think it comes down to that people generally don't perform their best during a crisis, but they perform at the level that they practiced. So the
And
more prepared, yeah.
you don't rise again, you don't rise the occasion, you devolve to the level of training. But the problem with that is even the people with training, and let's look at one broad swoop that'll answer your question. Uvalde, 19 children lost their lives and 2 adult teachers. There were 376 police officers outside for an hour and 17 minutes that could not act. So when you have somebody in your office that says, I volunteer to be an armed guard, I mean, you don't know what they're going to do. And even sometimes when you have the training to be assaultive to the aggressor, that is a different type of training than the type of training we're advocating for, which is a basic sense of awareness, because you can prevent the incident from happening in the first place. And I'm not specifically answering the question directly about why the psychological mechanism in your brain doesn't do it, because that's about your reticular activation system. And I don't think we should talk about that here. So instead, symptoms, causes, and then true prevention.
Yeah. Katherin, can we turn it back to you for a little bit and talk a little bit more about risk when it comes to workplace violence preparedness, and when organizations fail to prepare their employees, not with just with information, but with the skills they need to recognize, what risks are they creating? I know it's multi-layered.
Right.
Can you just talk through that a little bit?
Absolutely. And so, of course, the first risk you'd think of, and I'll unpack each after I go through each, is employee safety risks, right? So if employers aren't preparing their employees adequately, either by having a policy communicated, training their employees on the policy, having them practice behavior, they're running the risk of employee safety being at issue. They're also running the risk of potential legal and compliance risks that result from their failure to exercise a duty of care. You also have operational risks, and I'll detail that in just a minute. Reputational risks, if again, you're not prepared the way your employees or the general public expect you to be, and then cultural risks within the organization. So just to dive a little bit deeper with respect to each, employee safety risks, if you're not prepared, we can imagine what that would be, right? Like, one, you're not going to have employees who are speaking up as quickly as you wish they would, which will increase the risk of delayed reporting and bringing these risks to the attention of key decision makers within the organization. You might have greater confusion during these emergencies, employees not knowing what to do, how to handle it, reduced confidence in decision making. They're not sure what the right thing to do, what the right behavior is, what the right response, and then that all results in a greater potential for injury. So those are all the employee safety risks. Then, of course, as I mentioned, you've got the legal and compliance risks. So we started out by talking about the increased regulatory scrutiny and the requirements in this area, right? So just one example is if OSHA determines that there's a policy but no enforcement, you're at risk right then and there for a citation. So there's that increased legal compliance risk. You also have the legal risks we discussed of potential negligent claims by employees who claim that they weren't adequately prepared to handle these risks that the employer should have known about. And that ties in with the risk of, can the employer effectively establish that they exercised their duty of care and that they took those reasonable prevention efforts? So that's the whole legal risk bundle. Then you've got the operational risks if employers don't prepare their employees, right? So you've got business interruption if something tragic happens, where business isn't going to return to normal for some period of time. You've got lost productivity if you have employees who are upset and frightened and perhaps have post-traumatic stress syndrome, like as a result of anything that happens. You've got employee turnover, in the healthcare industry in particular. I don't remember the exact stat, but I think it's 30% of healthcare workers contemplate leaving the industry because of either their prior experience with workplace violence or the risk of workplace violence. And then you've got recruiting challenges. If employees don't feel like your employer is prepared and is a safe place to work, you may have a more difficult time recruiting top level employees. You've also got the reputational risks, which is like loss of employee trust internally or public scrutiny externally if either doesn't believe you're doing your job as an employer and a good corporate citizen. And then lastly, you have cultural risks if you're not taking the steps you need to. So either your employees don't feel supported, they don't feel like they're in a psychologically safe work environment, they don't have the confidence that leadership is actually trying to protect them, and they don't have the confidence in how to handle these situations. So really, as we talked about earlier, the greatest risk isn't really that a workplace violence incident will occur. It's that combined with the fact that your look back reveals that employees weren't prepared and you as an employer didn't do what you could have and should have done to prevent this issue from happening in the first place, which I know ties in with so many points that Chris was making. Like, let's try to prevent this from happening in the first place.
Yeah. I think one of the holdbacks that we've read about and we've actually heard from our own clients is that there's a concern from the organization that talking about workplace violence or providing a training on the topic is going to create more fear and anxiety. So, as opposed to being worried that they're not preparing their employees enough, they're worried that providing training and talking about violence is going to create fear and anxiety that they want to avoid in the workplace. So, how can organizations build a culture of readiness without creating that fear? Chris, I know this is something that you feel pretty passionately about. So you want to start?
You hit the button on the nose, right? So, yes, it's possible, and it's really not that challenging. The biggest challenge is talking yourself into just getting started. I'll do that tomorrow is usually what we're going to hear, or we don't have to worry about that. It's never going to happen here. And then some type of act of violence happens, and our inboxes get flooded at ASPP. Can you come train us tomorrow? And we try to shut down for a couple of days after these incidents because that's not what our business model is. We're not in the fear business, and I don't like to be in the response business. However, we do a lot of training with law firms across the country, and we have found that the hardest people to train, no offense, Katherin, is typically lawyers because they want to push back on point by point and litigate something instead of listen to how this is going to affect them. And when we flip it on its head and we took just like I did here where we started, make it personable and make it about the human, make it about you. It's right, the we, not the me. I might be speaking to you or with you, but it's not about me. It's not even about my own experience. It's about what happens across society and what ties us together. We don't want these to happen. So one way that we found works very well, and I'm going to walk through a basic retention side of this or even onboarding side of it from the retainment side. We would come in and we would talk to the executives and give them an overview and a quick brief on what we're going to do, what the objective is. And what we want to know is it's not our objective, it's theirs. What do they want to achieve? They want their employees to feel better. They want them to feel safe. They don't want anything to happen. And at the same time, they want to check the block. We can respect all that in quadrants. So we build this profile up. We take the training that we have, and then we'll record a video and we'll be with their leader and say, hey, we're coming to train you. This is important to your leader. And it's going to be something you take away and go home with and talk to your families about. And when you can incorporate that into your family life, it's a workplace add and a value add, not just we need 30 minutes of your time or an hour of your time. Then we found that zero stress training is the most effective because when you start putting people in stressful environments and you have a person with just, we call it the GIF, right? The good idea fairy show up and they say, hey, we know we're going to fire a blank gun and put these people under stress and show them what it's like. It turns out that 99% of that training is ineffective. And out of that training, many lawsuits have emerged over the past 10 years. So we refuse to play in that sandbox. Instead, we do things like soft walkthroughs. And what does that mean? It just means stand up from your desk, walk around your office, and know there's an exit on my left, there's an exit on my right. If I hear something wrong on the left, I leave from the right. Now, how do you make that more human? Does anyone here ever walk into a grocery store or Walmart or the mall? There's more than one entrance. And if something's going wrong at the entrance you came in, just leave through the other one. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, find out where the deliveries go and go out the back way. It literally is that simple of thinking differently about the situation and thinking differently about how you want to respond to it, because what you want might not always be what your employees want. So you have to find that common ground and meet and exceed what's good. And that way, if you do have the one or the two hits, like sign here that you've received training, it's going to go over much better than it would be if sign here, we're doing this compliance training. You know, it's a just difference in messaging. And you have to have somebody that's mature enough in the industry, and I'm not saying us, through an LMS or other, that you can trust, that will deliver a message that'll make people feel okay doing it, and they're getting a value add from it, and you're doing the the reduction on regret, the return on regret.
Yes, so true. Katherin, did you have any thoughts about creating training without creating fear? Any ideas you wanted to
Just,
add?
consistent with what we've been saying. I mean, I think it really comes down to the communication and the form of communication, right? Open, consistent communication, supportive cultures, which really foster that type of communication back and forth, normalized conversations without instilling fear. So I think those are really my key takeaways from this conversation so far.
Yeah. And I think that, Katherin, maybe we can expand on that a little bit, because we did talk about culture and the importance of having, open communication and all. So, what is the role of workplace culture in preparedness, in workplace prevention of violence and overall organizational safety? How does culture play a role?
Right. Good question. Good question. Because I think oftentimes people think of, all right, workplace safety, that starts with security. Like we need to have the right security in place. But to your point, Karen, you need to have the right workplace culture in place. You need to have an open workplace culture, a psychologically safe workplace culture, so that people feel comfortable, supported, and encouraged to raise legitimate concerns they have. And to Chris's point, every once in a while you're going to have people who say things that they just say things about anything and anyone. And if you've got good leaders in place and good HR, they'll know how to sift through those rare individuals. But generally speaking, the bulk of your employee population, you want to have as communicators and raising issues as they identify them. And so what we found, and what we found through reading articles and surveys and all that sort of thing, is that employees who work in psychologically safe work environments do feel more confident to speak up. They are not as worried about, what if I'm wrong when I raise this, to my bosses or HR's attention? Am I overacting? What are the consequences if I raise this? They have the confidence to raise a concern in the appropriate professional way, and the trust in their organization that it'll be handled appropriately. So we like to say that open communication in a workplace culture is a part of workplace prevention culture, so that employees do know what to report, how to report, when to report, who to report to. And then, of course, the difficult decisions need to be made by whether it's HR, in-house legal, or leadership in conjunction with oftentimes like other professionals like Chris or lawyers who will discuss, we understand the risks being brought to your attention. There may be risks in addressing what they're asking you to do, and there may be risks in not addressing, and let's figure out what the best course of action is. So you want to engage the appropriate experts once you get that information, so that you can make the right decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the important thing keeping in mind is that preparedness isn't really something that you can present once a year. It's not something that you could just hand out and read. It's a capability that an organization builds over time. This is something
Yes.
It's not a one and done, and it's not just about providing one workplace violence training once a year either. This is something you have to build trust. And like you talked about before, building that psychological safety so that you have this culture of people speaking up and being ready and prepared to see and be alert and feel confident in reporting. So,
Exactly.
I think right on this topic, and you're both exactly right. There's a question in the chat from Jan. I don't want to jump the gun, but this is the
yeah, I saw this. I was going to
perfect
ask you about this
time,
next, Chris, but
perfect time to answer this one thing. And maybe we're out of order. I apologize, but this would be the perfect opportunity if that's okay. Do you want to
yeah,
read the question by any chance?
Perfect.
yeah. Do you want me to read the question? And so
Would you
Jan
please?
says that we believe the folks most likely to commit violence in the workplace are employees who are working in the workplace. So are there any best practices for our training to keep in mind that we're also providing the training to someone who might later be a culprit?
So this is probably one of my favorite questions, right? This is a terrible topic, but Jen, whoever you are, well done, bravo. This is called insider threat, right? And there's all sorts of insider threat issues. And I've learned to talk about this to make it analogous to IT training. We teach people how to do facial recognition, fingerprint authentication, double passwords. And if you have somebody in your organization that wants to hack the information, they know the way to do it. The reason they don't is the reason they do is sometimes that psychological background is they want to challenge the system and quote unquote show you. And do you know that that's the exact same thing that evildoers say they want to show you? They want to make a statement. They want you to know their grievance. And the number one thing I tell people is if someone tells you they're going to do something, you believe them. And that is where it starts. But by no means get like, let's encapsulate this whole thing. This is not like riding a bike. You do forget and you don't remember, and it's not forefront in your brain, and that's okay. But repetitive training is supposed to be repetitive, like handwriting, right? We're going to, the art of handwriting or typing faster. The more you do it, the better you get. I'm not saying that you have to do rinse and repeat training for active shooters, but what I am saying is get that baseline now, or even active violence or active threats, workplace violence, etc. Now, to answer this specific question about insider threats, the majority of people that know their location is going to do this type of training reduces the risk by about, there's a lot of research, but we're just going to say over 90% that the person would pick somewhere else. Similar to the movie theater analogy without the signs. But part two to that is I have a personal example that we can share, and that's why it's my favorite question. We were doing training at a large Fortune 500 company, top 100, and somebody was going to go shoot it up the next day for various reasons, and their spouse happened to be in the training, and it was a battered spouse, a very poor incident situation, and the husband was demanding information, like tell me more about this and how it works. She goes through the training, and at the end of the training, she came over crying, and I thought we offended her some way. And I'm like, how can we, what is there going on? What's going on? How can I help you? And she says, my husband's coming here to kill everybody tomorrow. He has maps everywhere, loaded guns. And the police went, and sure enough, they did. There's three parts to that. One, a good prevention. Two, the training does work because she had the same information through HR for the past year. And it turns out this person was planning this assault for a year. And he found out that the active shooter training and another workplace violence trainer was coming, and he wanted to show them. So he's going to wait till that was over. That's the second facet. The third facet is address everyone the same and equal, right? As a good HR guidelines would be on just about anything. Keep everything level and explain to the coworkers the people that want to do harm. I'm going to tell you the FBI stat is 90%. I know it's 98%. So they just get freaked out by that stat. People will tell you they're going to do something before they do it 97% of the time. Online to a coworker, out loud, write it down, write notes, bathroom stalls, you name it. When you see that, report it instantly because you just don't know. Don't take anything for granted, but you don't have to hyper extend yourself over it. Please, Katherin, please.
That is such a good point, and something that every employee needs to be trained on, because I didn't know that information previously until knowing you either. But once you know that 90+% of the people are going to broadcast that they're going to do something, then if a colleague says something like that, that puts them in a real risk category. And it really raises the stakes on the importance of communicating and reporting, and then letting leadership or HR do a further assessment of it.
And that is when you go get the armed guards the next day, right? Maybe the employee's no longer there, or in the perfect world, they're escorted out immediately. And then how do you make the employees feel better? Because the rumor is going to happen. They're going to find out what happened. Have a couple off-duty police officers there for a day or two after. Everybody feels better. The person goes away. The problem's solved. And you see that the system of training worked. There's no better confidence builder. Of course, you don't want that to build confidence, but no, these do work and the systems do work.
Yeah.
They do work because I think all of us, if we're being honest, if we didn't have this kind of training and weren't aware of that statistic, we would hear something and think, like, just like people say that would never happen here, they don't really mean
Right.
it. That
They
doesn't
don't
really
know.
mean anything. But just having that information and knowing what to do with that information and having the confidence and the trust and psychological safety that you can report that and not be retaliated against, and report that and be believed, all of those steps along the way are so important to be able to actually prevent something from happening. So I think all this information is so valuable, and I'm so happy that all of you have been on this call for this hour, because I think there's been so much that we've been able to learn and take away. I think one of the highlights is that prevention and preparedness, they really aren't separate conversations, that organizations really need to create cultures where people are speaking up, they're reporting concerns, they're having an opportunity to practice decision making, so that they can create more opportunities for prevention and also have employees more prepared to respond if anything were to happen. And like we've said before, you're not looking back with regrets, that you've done everything that you can as an organization to prepare, to prevent, and take the steps to do the right thing when and if something were to ever happen. So we're drawing into the last 8 minutes of our hour. And so I just want to throw it back to each of you. If there's any last minute advice and what you would leave HR leaders and organizational leaders, if there's one message or one highlight that you want to emphasize, I'm going to throw it back to both of you to share last minute thoughts.
Katherin, I'll go so you can wrap it up, because you're probably much better and more experienced than I am. But I will tell you this, Jan, that was a great question. Anne, thank you for the feedback. And then Kim, I believe you asked a question about firearms carrying. And let's wrap it up this way. I do a lot of work for the government, and there's a lot of highly trained, qualified people to carry guns in the government. And the government has policies about carrying guns in certain places and not others. They know that the human is just not trained to confront a shooter. And I will tell you, there's some very poor statistics out there that I won't tell you what the categories are, because they're kind of a downer. But the people that try to use guns to stop guns that aren't prepared to do that and not trained, a CHL is not really a concealed handgun license. It might be a license, but it doesn't give you the psychological benefit of being able to be a gunfighter. And I don't think the day to learn how to be a gunfighter is the day you need to. So instead, prevent it and learn how to escape if something does go wrong. However, you asked specifically where to find more information. The state legislation has a lot of great information in all 50 states about the ones that are legal to carry and the ones that aren't, and they can tell you what you can and can't do. My personal opinion doesn't matter here, but my personal opinion based off facts would tell you it's a good premise to think that way, but have a professional if you're going to do it, not because you're not, but there's people that do that for a living. And sometimes you have 376 wrong people at the wrong scene at the wrong time. So again, I think you understand what my personal opinion is. That's not always the answer, but the bottom line of prevention training through response of good quality baseline, open your eyes, let's all breathe together, and we're going to be okay.
Yeah, spot on, Chris, for sure. And just to add to that, because I agree with everything Chris just said, it's just really understanding our duty of care as leaders and as organizations is tantamount. And we need to make sure that our workforces are ready well in advance of these issues. So ready, educated, practiced, so that if something does happen, we put ourselves in the best possible position to handle these. So I think everything you said today, Chris, was so helpful. Karen, you asked such great questions. The audience asked such great questions. So happy we had this discussion, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah. And if you have any additional questions, we do have a few more minutes. So as I'm wrapping up, please feel free to post your questions. And as we have these last few minutes, we'll do our best to answer them. Just want to give a couple quick reminders. One is that there is going to be a survey when you close out of this webinar. So again, your feedback is really valuable to us. So your minute or 30 seconds that you take to fill it out would be appreciated. You'll also have an opportunity to ask. We have 2 resources that you may be interested in. One is a workplace violence prevention plan checklist. This is really valuable for those of you in California because it helps you understand all the items and preparation you need to do to meet with the SB 553 requirements. Second is a guide it's designed for retailers. So it's really helpful for an organization with customer facing staff. So that's something you can request. And then finally, we have some demo days coming up. So if any of this sparked interest in seeing a demo of our workplace violence prevention or our active shooter, active threat preparedness course, we have demo days coming up on August 6th and at 12 and at 3 p.m. So there's going to be a link in the chat, and it'll also be in the survey if you want to sign up to see a demo of the course, see how it's designed, see how we go through some decision-making activities, and a lot of the great content. You'll see Chris's face. He is our Ask the Expert inside the course, so you'll get to see him answering some really important questions there too. So again, if there's any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but we've been so happy to have you here today. It's such an important topic, and we hope that in the last hour you've learned something that you'll be able to take back home, take back to your organizations, and keep those around you safe. And thank you both, Katherin and Chris. You've been fantastic panelists. So much great information shared.
Thank you to the audience, and thank you to you both. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
day. Take care.
Bye-bye.